I'm going to talk about how to train your dragon, where your dragon is an expert. Many of us work in hospitals, services, or we teach on courses where some of the people who come to be trained are incredibly senior. They are experts in their own field or in their own place of work. And that can be quite daunting as a trainer, but as a trainee or a dragon as well. So how do we do it? I'm going to try and look at this from both the trainer and the dragon's perspective. What I'd like you to do, though, for about the next 20 seconds or so, can you think of somebody who is maybe 20 years your senior, maybe holds a significant academic role, a professorship or two, has written multiple papers? You probably can. But they're coming to work with you, and you're going to be training them. How does that make you feel? And how do you think they might be feeling? I can probably guarantee you've probably all got a bit of this. Has anybody here ever felt like a fraud, or a fake, or a phony? Keep your hands up. Look around the room. See how many hands are up. If you've never felt like a bit of an imposter, you might just be a bit of a psychopath. So imposter syndrome, or imposter phenomenon, as it was first called, hits both the trainer and the dragon. And this term was first coined in 1978 by two female psychologists called Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes. And they did a study of 150 high-achieving women in mostly academia, actually. And what they found out, that these women felt like intellectual phonies, that they didn't deserve to be where they were, that their success was down to luck or other people's hard work or overestimation of their abilities. Now, we know it's actually far more common than that. It's not just a chick thing. Recent studies have suggested 70% of us will get it at some stage in our lifetimes, in fact, in our careers. And it often happens at a time of change, when you're moving to a new job, when you're being promoted, or when you're stepping up a grade at work. And it can be a bit of a vicious cycle, and it can hold people back, because it can stop people applying for things which they're eminently capable and qualified to do. You feel like a bit of a fraud. So you think of something you'll do. You'll do a higher degree, you'll go on a course, you'll get another qualification. And then you become a fraud with hope. And you get that qualification, you succeed on the course, you get your mega owl level on Duolingo, whatever it is. And you get that lovely warm and fuzzy feeling. But that warm and fuzzy feeling wears off and you become a fraud again. And you feel like a fake again. And you can go round and round and round, unless you can get spat out of that vicious circle. Now, Hewlett-Packard did a really interesting study. They put a job advert out on their internal network, and they listed 10 desirable and essential, qualifications, person specifications for it. And they looked at who applied, they looked at who didn't apply, and they looked at why those who didn't apply, why they didn't. And they found out that if men ticked 6 out of those 10 boxes, they would apply for the job. But women would only apply for it if they ticked all 10 of those boxes. And when they delved into the why, bearing in mind this wasn't women in academia, as in the first study of imposter phenomenon, the women said, we didn't think we were good enough. We didn't want to waste people's time. We didn't want to waste the interviewer's time. So if your imposter syndrome is bad, it can really hold you back. So how do we tackle it? We need to recognize it for the imposter that it is. It is genuinely an imposter. We need to own our successes and celebrate them. We've got to where we are because we have passed a series of truly objective tests to get where we are. We've passed the exams, we've got the qualification, we've succeeded at interview, we've got through the selection process. If you're ever having a wobble, you might like to think of a mental list of all the things you've achieved. If necessary, write it down. Stick it on your phone and have a quick look at it if you're having one of those moments. And we need to speak up about it. You looked around the room, you saw how many hands were up, minus the psychopaths, obviously. It's incredibly common. And I think one of the things that is most helpful is finding a mentor. In fact, the General Medical Council actually recommends doctors in the UK have a mentor, particularly at times of transition, particularly making the step up to be a consultant, to being the top of the tree. And a mentor will help support your growth and development. They will be a source of wisdom and support, and potentially very useful connections as well. And they will sometimes ask you those difficult to answer questions and help you to see things from perhaps a different perspective. They're essentially your own personal advocate. This is probably the most difficult thing, and that's challenging negative thinking. Because negative thoughts are like brain worms. Too soon after breakfast? They burrow in, and they're difficult to shift. We tell ourselves who we are, and we believe it. Belief influences our capabilities, and this impacts our behaviour. But those are our thoughts, and they are just thoughts. They are known only unto us. And you can actually change your mind by changing your thoughts. If you've got a particular negative thought, write it down and cross it out. Write it down and cross it out. We know the brain learns by repetitive actions. Imposter syndrome can kick up at any time. I mean, I've got a bit of it standing here in front of you lot. Of course I have. I'm normal, not a psychopath. Well, maybe I am a bit. But one of the really important things, particularly if you're going into something critically important, a job interview, a selection process, a grant application, is to picture that positive outcome. That you will get the job, you will get promoted, you will get the grant. And if you need to do some sort of confidence boosting stuff, do it. If that means doing positive affirmations in front of the mirror in the morning, do it if that works for you. If it's wearing your favourite lipstick, your lucky socks, your killer heels, appreciate it might work better for women than for men, but hey, we're a diverse and equality-ish world these days. Then do it. And remember that nobody knows if you're wearing your superhero underwear underneath your interview suit. But really, the most important thing is remembering that none of us is perfect, because none of us needs to be. And remember that perfection is the enemy of good enough. So, when it comes to trainers and their dragons, I think these character traits are hugely important. This is actually from Deloitte Insights. And it's the 6 character traits of the inclusive leader. So an inclusive leader is somebody who is aware of their own biases and preferences and actively seeks out other views and different perspectives to help shape their decision-making. And that description is absolutely perfect for a trainer and their dragon. These are all hugely important. But the one I like best is cognizance. It is recognizing we have biases. And when we have got an expert in their own world coming into ours, there will be bias associated with that. We will know their reputation. We may know them personally. And that bias, because it is a bias, can alter how we interact with them. And there can be a real conflict between rank and role. Here's a professor, they're coming into your service, your workplace, coming onto your course. How do you deal with that conflict between the fact that who they are in their normal world is potentially very different to how they are when they come into our world? I mean, imagine when Professor Simon Carley rocks up on your course to be taught. Wow. How do you deal with that? And of course, we've all got ego. Of course we do. But I would hope that the dragon arrives without the, hey, I'm the big I am. I would hope that the selection processes, certainly for jobs, particularly for pre-hospital services, will sift out some of that. And how we select people is really important. Ideally, we want people with high emotional intelligence and humility. The humility to ask for help, when it's needed, but also the humility to empower others to take charge when it's needed. And so how does the dragon coming into the service manage the bias that their reputation brings with them? I've spoken to a couple of dragons about this. And one of them uses this great line at the start of the shift. They say, "I am the trainee." They declare it. That is stating their place in the team. They are here to learn. And another quite nice trick to use is when you can say, because some of the more junior members of the team may be thinking, I have nothing to offer here. But everyone brings something to the party. We all have things that are important that we can share. For example, say to the pilot, I don't know this area very well. What can you tell me about the local geography? Where are the challenges? So everyone has subject matter expertise that they can share. And I think this slide is from Simon Sinek's Start with a Why. It's known as his golden circle, can be really, really helpful when working out how we are going to interact with the dragon and helping us deal with our bias. Why is the dragon here? Why your service? Why your hospital? Why your course? What are they wanting to achieve? And we have to remember that they're putting themselves in quite a vulnerable position here. And that's quite a brave thing to do. So what is their why? If you start with the why, it's super helpful. Inevitably, in the training process, this will happen, without a doubt. Failure is inevitable. And in our world, it can be both highly public and devastating. I was at dinner last night with a dragon, and we were talking about how we deal with poor outcomes. And yet we debrief, of course we do all the really good stuff. We have psychological support, as you've heard from Karina. But it continues to roll on, doesn't it? You might get a lovely letter from the family saying, thank you so much for what you did. But equally, you might see it playing out in the press. The 8-year-old girl who was run over by a bus, who's died. And you see the pictures of her going to ballet class, and you hear from her granny and her school friends about how amazing she was. Doesn't mean he did anything wrong, but bad stuff happens in our world. But what matters is our response to failure. It's incredibly easy to focus on the negatives. We are wired to do that pretty much. And it's very easy to apportion blame. You know, we say we work in increasingly no-blame systems. You know, yeah, we're just like the aviation world. It's not about the outcome, it's about the process. Yeah, right. The NHS can be pretty toxic for apportioning blame, it has to be said. But what we're trying to do is learn from it and develop and try and stop it happening again. Obviously, we can't stop the inevitable bad outcomes in our job because some of our patients will die because they are so sick or so injured that they cannot survive. And so debriefing is so important after failure. I'm going to talk mostly about failure rather than bad outcomes. It's so important because we are debriefing to learn. It's coaching to develop. And bear in mind, when we're training somebody, correction might be needed because they've done something that was wrong. But they need to understand why it was wrong and how we do it differently and why we do it differently. And the why we do things, the justification of why we do things as we do them, why we teach them this way, will absolutely need to be explained to your dragon, because your dragon is very likely to ask, why are we doing it that way? What about this way? So what's the justification? And again, talking about blame and error, I've been to some morbidity and mortality governance meetings, whatever you wish to call them, that feel like gladiatorial combat, where the person who's made the error is like the Christian about to be thrown to the lions. And I'm not sure that's a terribly helpful learning environment. So as trainers, if our dragon has failed, this can actually take quite an emotional toll and it can persist. So we do need to continue to check in. And our organisational culture, again, avoiding the gladiatorial combat is hugely important when it comes to failure. Ideally, we want to be in high-trust organisations where there is a lot of psychological safety and where we are able to be vulnerable. And that takes time to develop if you haven't already got it. And it's interesting how quickly culture somewhere can change. When bad stuff happens, if you get some toxic characters or difficult characters, that supportive, high-trust, psychologically safe culture can change incredibly quickly, and the recovery from that takes far longer than the change. So, feedback. It turns out if you're a Rothschild, you can even give feedback to a king. Looks like a proper and another thing. So, feedback. We've all said at interview, oh yes, of course I'm open to challenge. Yes, I crave feedback. Yeah, of course we do. Feedback can be uncomfortable. Feedback has negative connotations. But actually it doesn't equal criticism at all. Feedback done well builds psychological safety. As a trainer, we need to think about where. Does it need to be done somewhere private? We need to think about when. Does it need to be immediate feedback because there's been an error and we need to correct it and we need to stop it happening again? Or can we leave it till the end of that job, till the end of the day? As trainers, we need to make it normal. It needs to be regular. It needs to be consistent. And ultimately, we're trying to deliver three things if we're doing feedback, or one of three things, or two of them. Very rarely all three. It's appreciation, it's coaching, it's evaluation. And if it's evaluation, I would suggest that comes to the end of the conversation. And as a deliverer of the feedback, we have a responsibility to know what kind of feedback we're giving, which of those three it is, and also to set the expectation of what the dragon is going to receive. Because a mismatch can cause problems. If you find you are struggling with appreciation of your dragon, or indeed any of your trainees in the workplace, and sometimes it can be quite hard to find good things to say about some of our trainees, we can set ourselves a goal. Try and find two things that you want to give positive feedback, appreciation for. But also the so what. Why was it good? Why was it positive? I really like the way you spoke to that patient's relatives. You gave them a really clear expectation and they got a really good understanding of what was happening and what was going to happen next, and that was great. Or I really like the way you defused that situation by calming everything down. It made it a lot easier to get on with looking after the patient. But we also need to know what kind of feedback our learner needs. This is much easier when you get to know somebody and you've built a rapport, and you can actually ask them, what kind of feedback style do you like? And that can be tricky as a trainer, because if you're very used to doing feedback in a particular way, it can be tricky to change it for somebody who likes to learn in a different style. But it's much easier when your trainee knows what to expect. Is it evaluation or is it coaching? Is it appreciation or is it coaching? And that mismatch of expectation can feel really uncomfortable. If you've been expecting coaching, but you get correction or a poor evaluation, it can be quite a really uncomfortable conversation. You need to know what was done, if something was wrong, and why it was wrong, and why it needs to be changed, because you want to be able to move forward. Of course you do. We're all doing this because we like our jobs and we want to get better. There's a really great book called Thanks for the Feedback by Douglas Stone and Sheila Heen. If you haven't read it, do. It's brilliant. So, mentors, supervisors. How do you choose in your organisation who is going to be your dragon supervisor? Or do you let your dragon choose their supervisor? You might allocate them somebody very senior, but your dragon might find it's also quite helpful to have a mentor who's a more junior member of the team as well, who's perhaps a little bit closer to going through the process that your dragon is going through at the time. I think as a supervisor, our learners are there for the right reasons. And we have to acknowledge that, let's be honest, most of us, what we do is quite a significant part of our identity. And acknowledging that our dragon has put themselves in a vulnerable position because they're wanting to do what your organisation does or pass the course you run is hugely important. Whenever you choose somebody's supervisor, you've got to bear in mind that credibility and trust go both ways. If the trainer and the trainee trust each other, it allows them to ask for help as well as being able to offer help. Because our teams should be built on resilience and humility. But that comes back to how do we select the people we want to work with. In addition to the work mentor, I would suggest everybody gets one of these. The critical friend is the person we trust enough to tell us when we're getting it wrong. It's the person we can reflect with, where it's in the pub, over WhatsApp, going out for a run, whichever it is. And these kind of conversations can be difficult because your critical friend will challenge you. They will tell you when you're getting it wrong. But it is so important to know how to reflect and how to change. And what's even more important is if your critical friend tells you you're breaking rule 1. Do you all know what rule 1 is? It's don't be a dick. Again, not nice to hear, but absolutely essential. So, I'm going to finish up and summarize. It is incredibly challenging for both the dragon and their trainer. But if both of us can park our imposter syndrome, manage our bias, learn and develop after failure, give and receive high quality and timely feedback in a psychologically safe organization, and not break rule 1, then we will train our dragon, and our dragon will achieve their why. Because ultimately, if we start with the why, the rest will follow. Thank you very much.